Well, that's what we're all trying to do, isn't it? The truth, beauty of Christianity, to commend that in public. And part of my motivation in showing you that clip, other than just shameless promotion, is that you would think that an ordained minister whose job was with the Center for Public Christianity would have this public Christianity thing down pat. But I want to admit to you at the very front of this series of talks that isn't quite the case, that I still struggle with the pressure to keep quiet about the faith, which is very strong today. There are all sorts of reasons we might be shy about being public. And I remember a fascinating conversation I had with a pastor friend of mine down at my favorite cafe by the beach, where I was serving as a minister. And I was sharing with him what we were doing to reach out to the people of our region, the various programs we'd developed, the conversations we'd had with locals about how to reach them for Christ. And I noticed this woman sitting at a table not far from us, looking at us quite strangely, and I figured that she was maybe a Christian, really interested in the conversation that we were having about reaching out to the people of our area. And so I kept on talking with my pastor friend. And eventually this woman got up from her table, paid her bill, walked over to my table, and at what seemed like the top of her voice in a packed cafe, she said, "You want to convert the world, do you? How dare you?" And off she stormed. All eyes on me. Now, it was one of those moments where you think of the perfect comeback about an hour later. But at the time, I was dumbfounded. I, a professional promoter of the gospel, found myself for a few moments thinking, is this mission to reach out to others really beautiful? Is it really logical? Or is it just the stuff of fanatics who want to convert the world? I reckon lots of us, at different times, in some moments, have felt the same thing. Sure, some of us find it more easy than others. Some have personalities that, you can tell a joke in public really easily, and so you can tell the gospel in public really easily. And then I guess there are others who find the whole thing really, really difficult. But all of us, if you've been a Christian for more than about 5 minutes, you will have discovered that the pressure to shut up is pretty strong. The increasing pluralism of our culture that says all religions are basically the same, so you shouldn't pipe up about yours, let everyone have their own truth. That's pretty prevalent and keeps us quiet. You think of the increasing materialism of our culture that says there's nothing more than what you can see and touch, so don't go on about that stupid stuff. The scientism of our day that says, science has disproved Christianity, so shut up. You think of a very difficult issue like same-sex marriage. I reckon a lot of Christians just are afraid to say anything about their faith in public lest someone ask the question, and what do you think about same-sex marriage? And so we're at this point where a lot of us, I reckon, are feeling the pressure to be quiet. And so I want to wind back with you in this first session and ask, why do we want to be public about the faith? What's the sort of undergirding logic? What is it that makes it beautiful, despite the fact that there are people who'd rather we just shut up? And I want to deal in this first session with many passages of Scripture, but two very important texts, one from the Old Testament, one from the New, to show what seems to me the baseline reason for being public about your faith. The baseline motivation for piping up despite the pressure to shut up. And the first passage I want to go to is an extraordinary one because it pulls together so many themes of the Old Testament. It's Psalm 96. Now, I have them on the screen, but those of you who want to look at them in a real Bible or a device, that's permissible as well. Now, if we were in an Anglican church, of course, we'd all stand up and say the psalm together. But I know where I am. So, why don't we say it together sitting down? That's a compromise, isn't it? Yeah? Together? Sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord, all the earth. Sing to the Lord, praise his name. Proclaim his salvation day after day. Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous deeds among all peoples. For great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. He is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before him. Strength and glory are in his sanctuary. Ascribe to the Lord, O families of nations. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Bring an offering and come into his courts. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. Tremble before him, all the earth. It's good for the soul, right? Yeah. These opening lines of Psalm 96 pull together a sort of a massive theology, because here the Israelites themselves, who composed these psalms for public singing and declaration, standing up, declared this together. But this psalm opens up by asking God's people to declare the praises of this and other psalms within earshot of the other nations. Do you see that? It's clearly proclaiming his salvation day after day, declaring his glory among the nations, his marvelous deeds among all peoples. And no Jew could say those words without thinking of these words at the front of the biblical narrative. When Abraham is called and given a mission, the mission is precisely that he would receive a blessing for the purpose of being a blessing where? All the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. And so the language of the psalm, all these centuries later, that says that all the nations are to overhear this message, and that all peoples are to hear this message. It's quite clear that it's the fulfillment of the promise to Abraham, public praise amidst all the nations. Of course, Jerusalem in the ancient Old Testament period was an international city, and everyone expected people from all the nations to come through Jerusalem. There are various geographical and socio-political and geographical reasons why this would be the case. But in 1 Kings 8, Solomon totally expects foreigners to come to Jerusalem. As for the foreigner who does not belong to your people, Israel, but has come from a distant land because of your name, when he comes and prays toward this temple, then hear from heaven so that all peoples on earth may know your name and fear you. It was expected that the praise of Israel would be overheard among the nations, partly because Jerusalem was an international city. And by the time of Jesus, of course, the second temple, there was a massive court, that court that you can see on the left there, for the Gentiles. And you know what it was called? The court of the Gentiles. Yeah, really imaginative. But it was massive, and its purpose was so that Gentiles could actually come into the space and hear the praises of Israel, because that's where loads of the praises and prayers and readings took place, in the court of the Gentiles. And so this psalm has a context, even in ancient Judaism, in Old Testament, that the praises of God's people was for the purpose of the nations. This is not just a New Testament idea. And actually verses 7 and 8 underline the evangelistic nature of this, because look at the words. Suddenly in verse 7, the nations themselves are addressed. Ascribe to the Lord, O families of nations. That's not Israel. So suddenly the nations are being addressed. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. And look at this. Bring an offering and come into his courts. The nations are being invited to come and join in the worship of the one true God. So, here is this clearly evangelistically oriented psalm. And there are many psalms like it, by the way. Once you see it in Psalm 96, you begin to see it in loads of psalms. But the thing I want to reflect with you is why? What's the logic given in the psalm for this praise having to go to all nations? It's there in verse 4. For, or in Hebrew, ki, meaning because, great is the Lord. See the logic there? Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous deeds among all peoples. Why? For great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. He is to be feared above all gods, for all the gods of the nations are idols. This word in Hebrew means nothingness. But the Lord made the heavens. Here's the point I want to make. The glory of the Lord must be public for the simple reason that there is no other Lord. His sheer greatness demands that his glory go public. It is a scandal of reality that his glory is not overheard by the nations. Now, there are many other reasons why we might want to promote Christ to the world. Absolutely. But I want to put it to you that the fundamental biblical logic for mission is God's singular greatness. For great is the Lord, most worthy of praise. He is to be feared above all gods. All gods of the nations are Elilim, nothing. But the Lord made the heavens. Monotheism, the one Lord, and mission are inextricably linked. And the curious thing is, although if you're a Bible reader, it's probably not very curious, the New Testament says the same thing. The New Testament gives exactly the same logic. What would you say is the most well-known mission passage in the whole Bible? The Great Commission? Yeah. What's the logic Jesus gives to the 11? Let me read it. Then Jesus came to them, this is the risen Jesus, and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. What's the logic? What's the therefore? All authority in heaven and earth, which reminds us of Genesis 1:1, doesn't it? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And now it's all Jesus. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. That's why you go. Therefore, go. It's exactly Psalm 96. The fact that there is one Lord over all nations, over heaven and earth, makes the mission to all nations logical and beautiful. Our mission is more than a rescue mission. It is a rescue mission, don't mishear me. But it's more than a rescue mission. It's a reality mission. We are doing more than saving people from judgment. We are making what is real disclosed. We are promoting the one true Lord who gives life and breath to everyone. And his sheer greatness, more than any human need, makes our mission logical and beautiful. Some of you may know the apparently true story of some young lads who hopped on a bus in America in the 1930s, in Detroit. And they tried to pick a fight with this lone man sitting at the back of the bus. And these three lads insulted him, and he didn't respond. He was really quiet. And they turned up the heat of the insults. He didn't respond. He eventually stood up to get off the bus, and they realised he was a lot bigger than they'd guessed from his seated position. He reached into his pocket. He gave the young lads the business card and then hopped off the bus and went on his way. And the young lads gathered around the business card, apparently this is true, and read the words, Joe Louis, professional boxer. Now, those of you who know your boxing history know that this is the number one fighter of all time, even above Muhammad Ali, who's number two. Lucky kids. They were in the presence of greatness, and they didn't know it. Now, I want you to imagine we were the friends of Joe Louis that day, sitting on the bus. And these snivelling teenagers came along and were insulting Joe Louis. I bet you could not resist piping up. You would, of course, say, can I just explain who this is, guys? Of course you would. Why? Partly out of fear, for the young lads, depending on what mood Joe Louis was in, right? But I would say the main motivation was his sheer greatness. The clash of the trivial way they treated him and the greatness of his own person meant that you had to resolve that tension by saying, can I tell you who this is? I mean, forget that greatness. The people of our world, your next door neighbours, your friends, your brothers and sisters, they live and breathe in the presence of a greatness unparalleled, Lord of heaven and earth, and they don't know it. And I put it to you that we, the people of the Lord, who have glimpsed his greatness, will speak up. It's beautiful. It's logical to pipe up and say, can I tell you who this is? Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous deeds among all peoples, for great is the Lord, most worthy of praise. That's why. Why? How? How do we do it? What does the Bible say about the average Christian's method for making Christ public? That's what I want to do in the remainder of our time together. We could spend time reflecting on the famous passage about evangelists, where the Apostle Paul says Christ gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists. And that would be worth doing. But the interesting thing is, the Bible does not say we're all evangelists. Some are evangelists. We're all involved in the evangelistic task, of course, but we're not all evangelists. Those who have been given by Christ to the church for the task of disclosing the gospel. That's what the word evangelistes means, a gospel-er. Well, that's not all Christians. So I want to reflect with you on in the remainder of this talk, the two clear ways the Bible teaches every Christian proclaims the glory of the Lord. We're not all evangelists, but firstly, we all declare God's praises when we gather together in worship. This may seem puzzling, and in a sense we've already seen it in Psalm 96. See, what was Psalm 96? It was a psalm given to God's people for singing or saying when they gathered together. And it's clear that this public praise of God's own gathered people also functioned as a mission, didn't it? This is quite clear in Psalm 96, but there are many psalms that say the same thing, that the public gathered praise of God's people can be overheard by visitors in their midst, and that it becomes a proclamation of the gospel. Psalm 57, Psalm 66, Psalm 108, Psalm 117, and plenty of others say the same thing. Now, the New Testament teaches the same thing, that the gathered public praises of God's people in church declares his praises to those who don't believe. Here's Peter, who was, of course, raised a Jew, who was used to the psalm singing and praises and creeds and all that of the synagogue and the temple worship, and knew that this was a declaration of God's praises to the world, not just for praising God. And so in 1 Peter 2:9, he writes, "You are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light." Now, what does declare praises mean? Those who have studied 1 Peter will know that 1 Peter, especially 1 Peter chapter 2 and chapter 3, have loads in it about mission, about reaching the outsider. So in 1 Peter 2:12, you get that famous passage about living such good lives among the pagans that they come to realize God. In 3:1, you get that passage about wives living such godly lives before their husbands that they might even bring their husbands to the faith through good deeds. And in chapter 3:15, you get that stuff about always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you, right? So clearly mission is on Peter's mind. And that's why I agree with those who look at the words, "You've been called to declare the praises," must have a missionary flavour. But what kind of activity is he referring to? Commentators will tell you that the words there, aratas ex angelator, don't worry about the Greek, but they're the words, declare the praises, are words straight out of the book of Psalms. Aratas ex angelator are the Greek words of the Greek Psalms that were available in Peter's day for the public, corporate worship of God in the church service that functioned secondarily as mission to those who overhear our praises. Now, I'm not just making this up. The great Tim Keller says in the book, what's the book called? Worship by the Book. He talks about doxological evangelism. I really appreciate this statement. If you don't know Tim Keller, he's the senior pastor of Redeemer Presbyterian in New York. Israel was called, he says, to make God known to unbelieving nations by singing his praises. The temple was to be a center of world-winning worship. The people of God not only worship before the Lord, but also before the nations. God is to be praised before all nations. And as he is praised by his people, the nations are summoned and called to join in song. This pattern does not essentially change in the New Testament, where Peter tells a Gentile church to declare the praises of him who called us out of darkness. The term cannot merely refer to preaching, but must also refer to gathered worship. Your public worship on a Sunday is in and of itself a form of your proclaiming the gospel to visitors in our midst. And it has a powerful effect, and even the Apostle Paul expects the Corinthians to be conscious of this. Here's a complicated, famous, but I think brilliant passage for our topic today. At the end of his long discussion about the place of tongues speaking in church services, Paul sort of brings it to a close by talking about prophesying, which is the word for sort of intelligible speech, clear speech in the church service. But I want you to notice that he expects visitors to be in the church service and overhear what goes on. But look what he says. So, if the whole church comes together and everyone speaks in tongues, and some who do not understand or some unbelievers come in, will they not say that you are out of your mind? But if an unbeliever or someone who does not understand comes in while everyone is prophesying, He will be convinced by all that he is a sinner and will be judged by all, and the secrets of his heart will be laid bare. So he will fall down and worship God, exclaiming, God is really among you. What shall we say then, brothers? When you come together, everyone has a hymn, a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation, and all of these must be done for the strengthening or building of the church. Now, there's debate about what prophesying refers to, and we tend to sort of collapse it into that predicting the future prophesying, Nostradamus style, or even Old Testament prediction. But I'm pretty sure the word has a more general meaning in this letter, that it's to do with the clear speech that goes on in church, which is why when Paul concludes the whole thing, he talks about a hymn, a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. He doesn't mention prophesying. Why? Because all of these fall under the general category of prophesying. Yeah? Anyway, I could argue a little more about that, but I won't. I just want to make the general point, whether you believe me on that particular exegetical point. My general point is this. Paul expects the normal speech going on in a congregation to bring people to their knees in our midst who are just visitors. Notice he expects visitors to be in the first century Corinthian church, which is extraordinary because they were meeting in homes with no signs on the front saying, City Reach Church, right? Come here. All welcome. You never put that outside of your Corinthian villa. The only way a visitor could end up in a Corinthian villa owned by a private resident was how? Invited. And Paul totally expects that to be taking place. So he can assume in an argument about prophesying, he can assume it makes sense to the Corinthians. They will have been inviting friends along. And now his argument is, if you do uninterpreted tongues and those visitors you've brought, they're going to think you're weird. But if you're using clear speech, they're going to overhear you and they're going to know the presence of God in their midst and become Christians. That's what he says. And what I want to put to you is, don't underestimate the normal church service, week in, week out. Don't underestimate its power to bring visitors palpably to a sense of God's presence in our midst. I'm all for doing the outreach service tomorrow. Woohoo! Yeah. But I reckon next Sunday, and the Sunday after that, and the Sunday after that, are profoundly significant. Whether or not they are outreach services, your singing and praying and creed saying, oops, I forgot where I was. All the bits of your church service, of course, including the preaching, but every part of the church service declares the praises of God to those in our midst. I read this wonderful story about Nikki Gamble. I don't know if you know that name. Quite a famous author now, novelist. But she was a Triple J host, radio host, years ago, and then was poached by the BBC in London. And when in London and writing her novels and being a BBC presenter, someone invited her to church. And she went. And she tells this beautiful story in one of the Sunday magazines of how she went to the church service, had never going to church before, and was so touched by all the bits and pieces that they did, the singing and the prayers and the creeds, because it was that kind of weird church. And so she came back the next week, and the next week, and the next week, and the next week. And she says, we haven't stopped going since. And now she's become a Christian, and she's leading her whole family now in the way of the Lord, simply by attending a normal, boring Anglican church service. Because these... Is there one Anglican in the building? 1, 2, 3. The church service. Henry and Sandra are members of my church, St Andrew's Roseville. And some years ago, they were not churchy at all. They'd been turned off church massively. Henry had gone to a Catholic school and had turned his back on the whole thing. Sondra didn't have any faith. But one of their kids asked them about God one day, and they realized they didn't know a thing. So they said, okay, well, there's a church down the road. Let's go. Henry said, no chance. See ya. And so Sondra took her daughter to our church. Sondra loved the experience and begged Henry to come. Henry said, no way, you're doing that on your own. I got my coffee and my paper. Sunday morning sorted. But they had such an amazing time just at the normal church services. They eventually got Henry to come. And it was wonderful. I met Henry on that first Sunday. And he was sort of saying, the spiritual feeling of this place is amazing. Actually, I thought it was pretty boring. But he was really taken with it and came the next week and the next week and the next week. And both Henry and Sandra and their kids have come to know the Lord now and are regular and serving. And it wasn't through great evangelistic preaching. You know, I used to think it was, because then it would be all about me. That'd be awesome. But this was normal church, and Henry's experience of normal church, listening into the prayers, listening into the praises, convinced him that God was in our midst. Some of you will know the work of Rodney Stark, professor of sociology, not a Christian. But he's been researching conversion for 30 years. How does conversion take place in modern churches? And in an interview, he said basically the research boils down to, here it is, the rocket science of how churches grow. Ready? People invite their neighbours to church. What? Surely it's about our brilliant preaching, isn't it, brother? Yeah. No, it's about you inviting your neighbours, your family members, to normal church. The power of the church service. Now, I've forgotten when I'm meant to end. Or is that clock telling me I got 6:37, 36? So I have 6 minutes. Does that work out? I've got 6. Okay, I'll talk quicker. So the first way the scriptures urge all of us to proclaim the gospel is in church. Normal church. Take it seriously. Don't be checking Facebook during a hymn you don't like. Get into it. Declare the praises, because you never know those listening in who are brought to the Lord as a result of that. But there's a second way that the New Testament teaches that all Christians have Jesus on the lips. And it's this simple. Giving an answer for your faith when asked. It's not really rocket science, is it? But the two apostles, Peter and Paul, almost look like they got together at some conference, some evangelism summit, and said, when we tell our people to have Christ on the lips, why don't we tell them to give an answer? Okay. And then completely independently of each other, in letters, wildly apart in terms of time and so on, look what Paul says to the Colossians. Be wise in the way you act toward outsiders, making the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. Answer everyone. 1 Peter 3. Do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened by the world. But in your heart set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. In my judgment, these are the two clearest passages in the whole New Testament, urging every believer, not just evangelists, pastoral workers, every believer to have Christ on the lips. And they both say, give an answer for your faith. And so there are several things I just want to reflect on very briefly in my 4 minutes, 15 seconds left. Firstly, all Christians have a responsibility and the privilege to give an answer when appropriate. Secondly, notice that the motivation for giving an answer in the 1 Peter passage is precisely the same as we saw in the Great Commission passage and in Psalm 96. It's Christ's lordship that inspires speech. See, he says, but in your hearts, set apart Christ as Lord. And in Greek, this is just one sentence, by the way. Always being prepared to give an answer to everyone. Set apart Christ as Lord, always being prepared to give an answer to everyone. See, the logic is, there may be all sorts of reasons you're shy to speak up. All those reasons I mentioned at the outset. The pressure of the world for you to shut up. But the thing is, if you know that Jesus Christ owns every room, not just this room, but the cafe you're going to go to, the university lecture hall, the TV studios, the radio studios, Parliament, the workplace. Jesus is Lord of every single room you find yourself in. And if you set apart Christ as Lord, you won't fear what others fear. And you'll be ready to give an answer. Because you know his greatness, and his greatness outdoes the greatness of every lecturer, talk show host, scary non-Christian. I'm not saying you'll all become evangelists, but I am saying you'll become the best version of yourself. If the key to your motivation is not, the preacher said I have to preach, so I'll try and preach. That'll kill you and crush you. But if you just stop when you're in a situation where someone asks you about your faith and just remind yourself who owns the room, Jesus, you'll be the best version of yourself. And that's all the Lord asks of you. Notice, thirdly and finally, that both apostles are really concerned with how you give the answer. There's not much about what to say, presumably because it depends on what they ask you, right? But notice that both apostles are really concerned about how you say it. See, he says, let your conversation be always, what? Full of grace, seasoned with salt. I think this just means seasoned with the salt of graciousness. And that's how you'll know how to give an answer, graciously. But then Peter says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. I'm sometimes hopeless at this. So hopeless that when I went on Q&A that time with Lawrence Krauss, I knew it was going to get a little bit heated. On my piece of paper, I'd written with gentleness and respect across the top of my paper in bold writing. But I'd written it in Greek, so Lawrence Krauss didn't know what I was telling myself. Prautes kai phobos, gentleness and respect. I'm not sure how well I pulled it off, but I did have Peter whispering in my ear for the whole scary hour. But I'm sometimes hopeless at this. I remember at a pub with some friends, and I met a friend of a friend who was a self-made millionaire, multiple millionaire, and he was telling me all that was wrong with the church. He said, you Christians, you're all hypocrites. Science has disproved the Bible. And I was pretty cool with that, because, apologetics, yeah. But then he said, and Christians only became popular because of the Christian armies forced everyone to convert throughout Europe. And I went, what? He said, no, scholars have proven that. It was only with the sword in the hand that people became Christians. I said, are you mixing your religions up here, mate? He said, no, scholars have proven it. Well, a little switch went off in my head, I'm afraid. I reminded him that I had a couple of degrees in that very question. I quoted authors he'd never heard of. My voice heightened. And at the end of it, the worst thing happened. I won the argument. And I lost the person. He went away thinking I was an arrogant jerk. And on that occasion, I was. I wish Peter had been in my ear. Prautes kai phobos. Gentleness and respect. You cannot commend Jesus Christ to the world with arrogance because we are commending the Lord who gave himself for us, who would rather die on a cross than see anyone fall under judgment, who lets the sun shine on the righteous and the wicked alike, who loves every person. You can't be a jerk and commend Jesus Christ. Why do we reach out? His sheer beautiful greatness. How do we reach out? Through our regular praises and in our regular conversation, full of grace, with gentleness and respect, just like the Lord we serve.